Welcome to the DPM podcast, where Alexa and I give our 2 cents on all things digital project management. I'm Ben Aston, founder of the Digital Project Manager.
And I'm Alexa Alfonso.
Firstly, though, I wanted to talk about agile project management. And I want to talk about agile project management because it's something that's talked about a lot. And I think there's perhaps lots of misconceptions about what it really is. And I specifically asked Alexa to join us today because Alexa works for an agency where there's a lot of agile stuff going on. And I was hoping she would help offer some insights in what she understands by agile project management. And I want to talk about what it is, why it's important. I want to talk about how we prepare ourselves for agile project management, if there's any real difference between project management and agile project management in terms of the skills we need or how we execute it. So Alexa, do you want to just give your 2 cents on what agile project management is, and is it actually different from project management? Over to you.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Well, I'll be the first to admit I'm an Agile fangirl, but it is not for every project. It's not a silver bullet. I know there's a lot of more like modern projects require it in a way, but I just want to set the stage that it's not going to fix all your issues, because I do think, Ben, it's just an Agile way to manage projects. So to me, at least, it helps break down these larger projects into more manageable tasks where you're working on them in these short iterations or sprints. To me, at least, that's the way I think of it, versus maybe like a longer, more waterfall style project. And I think it matters because the team can be more flexible and adapts to changes in the project when they happen. We all know they will. No scope of work is ever perfect. You can't have a crystal ball in front of you and predict the future. So to me, an Agile project manager and an Agile project management style will be able to say, okay, after this sprint, we're going to need to change some things about this because the requirements have come in and they're a little bit different than we expected. And so through some things we'll talk about later, I think that those are the real benefits of an Agile project.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. And I think when I'm thinking about agile project management, I think it kind of sounds maybe a bit scary sometimes, and you'd be forgiven for thinking, hey, well, sure, I can do project management, but can I do agile project management? And I think what I would suggest is actually project management and agile project management are one and the same thing. It's just the context in which we're delivering different projects. Obviously, in agile projects, as Alexa's talking about, we often run projects in sprints where there's a period of time. We commit to a backlog of work in a sprint backlog, and then we try and execute and deliver value in a specific time frame. So we have a sprint. The sprint is, say, 2 weeks long, and we have a sprint goal. And at the end of the sprint, we're trying to deliver something. We're trying to deliver a tiny piece of value and then build on that value sprint by sprint. So that means agile projects are great for scenarios where, maybe the client hasn't defined exactly what they want particularly well, or where things are kind of up in the air a bit. So if you're thinking about that from a project management perspective, it does mean that within agile project management, the requirement for us as project managers to create really detailed estimates. And Alexa, do you just want to talk about the kind of engagement model that an agile project typically, or in your scenario, would look like? Because I think it's important to think about when we're running more agile projects, the engagement model has to change. It can't be a fixed price. It can't be a kind of a set timeline. The scope can't be fully defined because the nature of the project is that we're iteratively delivering on something. And I think it's really important for us as project managers to understand, hey, well, if you want to run an agile project, the engagement model needs to be different. The way that the client is paying for the project, the way that the client is defining the project needs to be different. So Alexa, do you just want to talk about, from your experience, what that engagement model looks like? Because I think that impacts the way that we project manage as well.
Definitely. Yeah. And this varies from shop to shop. But for our agency, we have a dedicated team model. So we'll often in the sales process start with gathering, what they're trying to achieve. What is the business outcome? And kind of work backwards from there. And we end up putting together a roster of team disciplines together. So we say, okay, for this, you're going to need a React developer, you're going to need a designer, a product manager, quality assurance testing, and we commit them to a set amount of time. And the client pays for those dedicated team members every month. And it is tricky because, as Ben mentioned, like this works really well when the client isn't totally sure what they want to build or what needs to be delivered, but they know they need something. And so we'll conduct a series of workshops in the beginning to make sure that we have an idea of what the outcome ought to be. And then that dedicated team gets to work on these, usually 2-week sprints. What benefits that has, obviously, is those team members are dedicated to the project and can adapt when things come up and change. But you're right, like we're not pricing that based on estimates or story points or user stories or whatever we used to try to do about 5 or 6 years ago. Instead, we're just saying, here's your team for 3 months and we'll bill you at a regular monthly rate. So that works well for our agency. I know it is a little different depending on the type of projects that you're doing, or if you're an in-house team, right? But at least for our agency, that's proven to be really effective, and it delivers a lot of value to our clients because of that dedicated model.
I'm just going to share this screen, which is actually taken from our DPM school. And this is in week 1 of the course, where we talk about different methodologies and how different methodologies work. But one of the things that we compare is agile projects with more waterfall projects. And I think hopefully this will kind of help you guys begin to see the difference. So obviously agile projects, what we're talking about is a variable scope with a fixed time and cost. So what Alexa is talking about there is, hey, the fixed time and cost is that the number of sprints that the client is buying into. And there's a fixed cost per sprint because you're just buying a team. So let's say, for argument's sake, that the team costs $20,000 per sprint and they're buying 3 sprints, or they're spending $60,000. So in that sense, they're buying 3 sprints, maybe it's 2-week sprints. So it's like a 6-week project, it's $60,000. But it is the cost is variable in as much as we don't really know where we're going to get to by the end of those 3 sprints. But I hope that makes it clear. But the idea of this is that we deliver value early and we deliver it incrementally. That we're kind of open to change, that the client is part of the team. And it's great, as we've been talking about, for unclear, flexible requirements. If the client's like, hey, well, we're not entirely sure what we need to do or what the solution is here, but we know we just need to get started on something and then iterate on it, then that can be a great approach. So a kind of big component of this is the collaboration. And typically when we think about waterfall projects, we have our teams working a bit like a relay team. So, we'll have maybe strategy, do some work, and then it will go to user experience. Then perhaps it will go through to design, then to development, then to QA, then it'll be released. And then the cycle starts again. Now, when we're doing projects more agile, typically what that means is we're running more things in parallel. So maybe strategy, UX, and design are happening at the same time. They're kind of collaborating together. And then maybe development is happening at the same time as things are being tested. So we're doing continuous integration, and we're kind of releasing things as we go. So what does this mean for us as project managers? Well, I think this means that actually some of the skills that we need are slightly different. So I think when we think about agile project management, I think what's important is that our role as the facilitator for the team is really, really key. I think what we're doing is we're identifying potential issues and roadblocks in the same way we would in a normal project, but because we're bringing the team together and they're working collaboratively, that kind of level of engagement needs to be much higher. But Alexa, in terms of when you look at maybe the project or product managers in your teams, what are the kind of skills that they have, and how do you think that kind of differs from more traditional project management?
Yeah, facilitation is a really huge one. I think there's also this element of like coaching and understanding when the players on your team or the team in which you're managing might need some support or might need some conflicts resolved. And even with a high functioning, like collaborative team, there's going to be things that kind of butt heads. And so to me, a PM successfully in this agile world can recognize those things and then find opportunities to cut through and find a resolution. That's easier said than done, obviously, but it's kind of those soft skills of interpersonal relationships and how can we kind of come to a conclusion on things and work together to find a common ground. There's also a huge element of being flexible, as we've talked about, and to me, at least, I think kind of selfless. Like you need to kind of put your ego aside sometimes when you're leading a team like this and recognize that there's going to be things that you have to give up maybe, but for the betterment of the team and for the project. So those are a few that come to mind. I know there's a lot more, but they're definitely like these soft skills. You don't need to be as analytical maybe or data driven. Not to say those things aren't important, because they really are, but it really is trying to facilitate this team to reach this end result and deliver value ultimately to the client.
Yeah, and I think with agile project management, there is more of an emphasis on soft skills, and that kind of comes back to what I was talking about earlier. The requirement for us to have as much documentation is not there because, hey, we don't need a really fully fleshed out estimate because we're not estimating anything other than the size of a team for a certain duration of time. The project plan itself, again, a hard skill, project planning. Again, we still need to have an idea of how many sprints something might take. Clients are always going to want to know, well, how much is this going to cost? When will it be delivered and what will be delivered? And so as project managers, I think we need to be really careful when we're running projects in an agile environment that we don't overcommit on that. But the reality is, in this iterative approach, we're not going to be able to tell clients exactly what they're going to get and when they're going to get it. But what we do instead is really clearly define the process. So we say, hey, we're going to have 5 people working on this project. They're going to work in 2-week sprints. We're going to follow this process where we go through discovery, and then we go and start with sprint planning, and then begin to iteratively deliver value through sprints. So we can't tell you exactly what you're going to get. And so a huge element in this is trust building. The client has got to believe that you have their best interests at heart, that you're not going to rip them off. So building trust is incredibly important. And all these soft skills that we use in project management day to day are really important, like prioritization is incredibly important when we're working at, okay, well, what's going to deliver the most value first, and we focus on delivering value. When we think about critical thinking, that's incredibly important. When we think about communication and making sure there's alignment between stakeholders, the client and the team about the prioritization, about what we're doing in what order. Diplomacy is really important as well. But I really like what Alexa talking about in terms of coaching. We are coaches for the team. We're coaches too for the client who probably haven't got much experience themselves in engaging with these kind of projects. So the soft skills, I would suggest, are really, really important when we start thinking about agile project management and how we manage projects in that context. I want to go to Nicholas's question though. Alexa, maybe you can pick this up.
Yeah.
How do you create parameters so that the boss or client doesn't misuse the definition of agile to be scattered? So we develop plans, but boss likes to switch constantly based on what she feels like doing instead of what's planned. And I think this is, from my perspective, this is everything that's bad about agile. Is this kind of misconception that agile just means we don't have a plan, we can just keep on changing what we're doing, and just do everything on a whim. And I think from a business perspective, I think that's incredibly dangerous because you're not going to deliver value. You are yeah, the client's going to be kind of pissed by the end of it because you'll have spent their money and not really delivered anything. But Alexa, what's your kind of perspective on this?
Yeah, well, first of all, solidarity. I have a situation myself with my boss who's great, but he's an ideas guy. And what happens is we'll kick off a sprint, and then about halfway through, all these new ideas come in. And so, again, Agile can, if it's not defined correctly, it can feel like it's really willy-nilly, and it's not. So what I've done to combat this is I've shortened our sprint sometimes down to 1 week, and locked that in and made the sprint goal very clear and visible to everyone on the team, including my boss. And then about halfway through each sprint, I'll meet with him individually and say, okay, what's coming up on the horizon here? Like, what are you feeling right now? What are some things that are exciting you? What are some new ideas that you have? And then I work with the team to build up the backlog for the next sprint based on that feedback. So instead of waiting 2 weeks and maybe disrupting the work for that time, I've shortened it down to 1 and met with him regularly to make sure that I'm kind of fielding his priorities in a way that will influence our next sprint. It can be tough. It's a discipline to say, this is our sprint. I'm not going to break it unless it's going to like shut down the business, which, let's be honest, nothing ever will. Unless it's going to shut down the business, we can disrupt the sprint. But otherwise, we're going to stick to this agreed upon goal. I bring him into all those conversations so that he feels, and because he is, our client, and we want to make him happy, but we ultimately try to find ways in which he feels heard, but we can still commit to an amount of work that everyone's comfortable with. That makes sense. Ben, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's all really solid. I think what's really important is to define the process and to get clarity on, hey, this is how we work. And there needs to be some standardization of how you go from project brief to project delivery. And that might look like sprints and short 1 week sprints, or that might look like, hey, we actually are doing the same kind of things every time. So let's just agree that when we're producing these campaigns, we follow these steps. And maybe thinking about it as like a standard operating procedure or checklist can be helpful, because you say, okay, I've looked at the projects that we've done for the past 6 months, and each of the projects, in order to get them live, has required us to go through these 10 steps. So can we agree that these are the steps? Can we agree that this is our standard operating procedure, that we've got this checklist? And then can we agree that this is the route that we take, that we go through design, we have a internal review, we have a client review, we allow for 2 rounds of that, and then we go into whatever it is, broadcast, or we put it live, or whatever it might be. Just think about the process. See if you can. Your boss might not see it as, hey, we're always doing the same things. But it sounds like you are kind of tackling the same kind of challenges. So see if there's a way that you can put an operating procedure around it. Maybe think of it as a checklist, and that might help with that kind of, flip-flopping back and forth between different things. But yeah, that is a challenging one for sure.